In the 1990s, Washington Heights in northern Manhattan was known as the crack and murder capital of New York City. 10 years later, it had low crime, new restaurants, and a growing art scene. My book, Crossing Broadway, Washington Heights and the Promise of New York City, tells why. I'm Rob Snyder. I'm a historian and the son of former Washington Heights residents. I wanted to understand what happened to my parents' old neighborhood. Washington Heights is where generations of New Yorkers have come to build a better life. Before World War II, they were mostly Irish, Jewish, Greek, and African Americans. After the war came Cubans and Puerto Ricans. By the 1980s, Washington Heights was the home of the largest Dominican community in the United States. All of them embraced the promise of New York City, the belief that with hard work in New York, an ordinary person could start a better life. But like most New York neighborhoods, Washington Heights is a place with its own internal divisions. Since the 1920s, Broadway has been a boundary between white and black, Jewish and Irish, Dominican-born and American-born, affluent and poor. Cooperation didn't come easily here. In Washington Heights, as in so many New York neighborhoods, people were torn between narrow tribal loyalties and wider loyalties to humanity. It wasn't easy. But then some of the toughest years in the history of New York City came in the 70s, in the 80s, and in the 90s. Crime rose, the economy declined. Then came the crack epidemic and the murders in Washington Heights. But faced with all of these obstacles, people looked around, they turned to each other. They learned to cross ethnic and racial lines to work together for their community. My book, Crossing Broadway, Washington Heights and the Promise of New York City, tells a story of change, courage, and learning to cross the narrow boundary between an open community and a closed community. We don't know what the future will bring in New York City. Today, the growing gap between rich and poor puts new pressure on the Heights. More affluent newcomers here have moved into buildings that once sheltered working families. People who once worried about muggings now worry about rent increases. This much is clear for New York City from the history of Washington Heights. A just, democratic, and sustaining city will be found only by working on both sides of Broadway.